So if you didn't catch the first video in this series, it's based on a recently released documentary style video by a channel called True Crime Stories with Ty Knotts. Clearly not his real name. Now, as I mentioned in the previous video, he has done some pretty good research on Kiely's case. I will give him that. But when you are someone who creates single standalone videos about cases, you don't have the luxury of doing really deep dives. So there's a lot of instances where he has made mistakes with information or taken a bit of what I would call poetic license. In other words, his goal in putting out this video is to entertain his viewers. He wants to engage viewers. He wants them to stay watching till the end of his video. So in order to do that, there are things that he can't dig into too deeply because he doesn't want people to lose focus on the original narrative. And of course, there are instances where he chooses to perhaps embellish or romanticize the story. So my goal in going through this documentary is to go through, correct the mistakes that exist, and also to add some insight. I'm actually watching this video cold, in that having watched the first 5 minutes of it, I decided that I would do it as a reaction video, so that what you're getting is my very first reaction to the things that he says in relation to Kiely's case. Now, before we start, if you're new here and you're not subscribed to my channel, please hit the subscribe button. Also, if you like my content, please hit like and leave a comment underneath.
Lindsay woke up the next morning to discover that Kiely was not in her room and that her vehicle was not parked outside. After she'd been unable to get a hold of her after a few calls, she instantly phoned the police and reported that Kiely was missing.
Okay, so I'm so grateful to anyone who steps up and gets Kiely's case back out there and being seen by an audience. And he has a large audience, but at the same time I get really annoyed with people who cover a case that they don't really know, but they're doing it because they want to have that story, but they don't thoroughly research the case. So let's talk about what really happened. Lindsay didn't straight away call the police. Lindsay woke up, she saw that Kiely wasn't in her room, she checked, she saw Kiely's car wasn't there. She did not contact the police. She contacted Kiely's friend Maddie Wicks and asked Maddie if she knew where Kiely was, and Maddie volunteered to head back out to where the party had been to see if she could find Kiely. Then while Maddie was doing that, Lindsay went to meet with Kiely's friends at the Starbucks where Kiely was meant to meet them, because she was supposed to be going camping with those friends. It was actually much later in the day when Lindsay finally reported Kiely missing to authorities.
But the police didn't issue an Amber Alert immediately. They said that there was no evidence that Kiely had been abducted.
So the choice of whether or not to issue an Amber Alert came down to CHP, and they made it quite clear in a town meeting that the criteria for an Amber Alert simply wasn't met in Kiely's case. So not at all, like he's saying it wasn't immediately called like for an Amber Alert, but there was never an Amber Alert called for Kiely. And now it's interesting because on one hand we have CHP saying she doesn't meet the criteria for an Amber Alert, we can't say that there's an abduction here. And then you have Angela Muslim saying to all these media outlets, well, we're treating it as an abduction because we can't find the vehicle, which everyone thought was kind of odd in the first place. Just because the vehicle's missing doesn't mean that you treat it as an abduction. The most logical thing that you would think would be that she has run off the road somewhere.
They went to the area where the party was held to conduct a search and interviewed about 1/3 of the partygoers.
Okay, so let's just make it up as we go along now, shall we? The way he's saying that makes it sound like the party was still going and they went there and started interviewing all the partygoers to find out where Kiely was. That is not the case at all. The search was extensive. Sure, they looked at the area where the party supposedly was, but they were looking at the entire Prosser Reservoir area, Boca Reservoir area, Stampede, all those areas surrounding the location of the party. They didn't just go and look where the party was. And as for interviewing the individuals who had been at the party, yes, we have accounts that they were able to interview a number of individuals who'd been at the party, but we also know that a large number of people chose to stay silent and not go forward and not say that they had been at the party.
Investigators urged more people who attended the party to come forward, but many of the attendees were skeptical about speaking with authorities. Most of them were about to start college and were fearful that the repercussions from their activities at the party would ruin their future in some way. The police were vocal about the fact that no one would be in any trouble for things that happened at the party. They just wanted to find Kiely. But this wasn't enough to sway the minds of the partygoers. Most of them remained tight-lipped.
I can't.
Okay, so clarification. Police said that they would not be pressing charges for underage drinking or use of drugs at the party because they wanted to find Kiely. It wasn't like a whole carte blanche, whatever you did at the party, you can't be prosecuted. That's not correct. And let's not forget that a large reason why so many people weren't coming forward was because apparently, and we have this from law enforcement, there were adults that were putting pressure on the teens to stay silent and not come forward. Of course, many of us suspect that there were also certain teens who were putting pressure on other teens to keep their mouths shut.
Word traveled fast about Kiely's disappearance, but despite there being over 200 people in attendance, no one reported seeing anything.
Is that Kiely?
Yet both Kiely and her vehicle were missing. How is this possible? Surely someone would have seen something.
People did see things. People came forward and said what they saw. A lot of people never had law enforcement get back to them when they called in tips. There was no follow-up on so many tips. And then, of course, there were other things that were labelled fake news by law enforcement and squashed when they were made public.
Sammy decided to host a meeting with everyone who attended the party that night. No detectives were allowed at this meeting, in hopes that speaking with peers and friends would put them more at ease. But still, nothing new came from it.
I'm just going to quote Sammy. One of the many odd things that she said, "I'll take your name to jail." Why would you be going to jail? Why would you need to take anyone's name for jail? It was very odd. And many, many people speculate that these teen-to-teen meetings were simply a clean-up effort. An attempt by those involved with whatever happened to Kiely to silence any witnesses.
Sammy told authorities several times that she was the last person to see Kiely. Sammy and other girlfriends of Kiely were vocal about the pushy older guys that were creeping them out at the party. And this is when Sammy and the other friends decided to leave. This caused many people to raise their eyebrows. Why would a group of girlfriends leave one friend behind if they knew that she'd been drinking and that there were older men in attendance who were making these young girls feel uneasy?
I'm going to break that down a little bit. So we have Mag's account of her getting to the party with Kiely and having older boys trying to force her to take bong rips without her boyfriend present, whatever she meant by that. And we're supposed to believe that that's the reason why she left the party after 10 minutes or half an hour. We have accounts from other so-called witnesses who, for us having done an analysis of, don't sound so credible, and they talk about older guys at the party also. And there has been some mention here and there of older guys at the party. But let's be honest. If there were that many older guys at the party, you would imagine that the younger people like Kiely and that would have left much sooner. And also, let's be clear, Sammy never said that she left because of older guys at the party. And amongst other things, she said that she never felt threatened or never felt like they were getting any bad attention from older guys. So this story doesn't completely line up. There is an account of some guys turning up around 12:30ish in a vehicle, and they were supposedly older guys and they were making a scene. But once again, that is one person's account. There may have been older guys, but I think it has been overplayed to try and hide whatever truly happened to Kiely. And I think that if there were older guys at the party that were involved somehow, they were quite possibly called in to try and scare younger people away from whatever had happened.
Even though Sammy reported that there were hundreds of photos and videos from that night, not a single one gave any evidence to Kiely's state of mind or whereabouts. Police were simply at a loss.
No, the truth is we have no idea what was actually in all those photos that were handed on to law enforcement, because law enforcement have kept it pretty damn quiet. So we don't know if there are any photos that show what condition Kiely was in, or what happened to her, or where she went, or anything like that. We don't even know what witness accounts were given, because none of this information has been shared by law enforcement. The only information we have been given is that there was a video showing her wearing the Odd Future hoodie, and also that there were videos showing a fight. And while law enforcement are careful to try and avoid saying that Kiely was in the fight, they have asked for more videos of the fight or fights, which to me makes you think that it was something that involved Kiely. And we certainly have plenty of accounts which say that Kiely was in a fight with Sammy.
Finally, days after Kiely's initial disappearance, investigators were able to confirm the last time her phone connected to cellular data was at 12:33 a.m., which would have been about the time she spoke with Sammy on the phone. So whatever happened just seconds after that call, well, it couldn't have been good.
Okay, it's probably unfair of me, but I got really angry with him here. Because we know that it's not possible for Kiely to have made a 12:36 phone call to Sammy. You can't write it off by saying, well, the last ping was around 12:33, which kind of fits in with her having made a phone call to Sammy around 12:36. That's not logical and it's not correct. So let's not forget, location services for that phone were turned off at 12:03. Then exactly half an hour later was the very last trace of that phone, the last ping. Had she made a phone call after that at 12:36, then law enforcement would be saying that was the last trace of the call, the last ping. You can't make a phone call to someone and not leave digital evidence of having done so. And law enforcement were quite clear when they said that after 12:33 we have no confirmed additions to the timeline. meaning they were quite clear, without being specific about it, that that 12:36 phone call never happened.
Police now had their first and only lead, and the search for Kiely was on.
Okay, I'm going to apologise profusely to this guy, because it's not my intention to jump in and shred his video, but bullshit. Okay, what I've just said, the phone call to Sammy never ever happened. That wasn't a lead that investigators had in terms of trying to find Kiely. The lead they had was the last known phone location, the last ping from that phone, which occurred in the area of the party, and coincidentally pretty much right where they found her car eventually. But we'll get back to that.
Sammy quickly became crucial to the investigation, having spent so much time with Kiely the night she disappeared, and she went on to do several media interviews. When asked about an interview about what she believed happened to her friend, Sammy says she thinks that, quote, somebody knew she was drunk, offered to give her a ride home, but didn't give her a ride home.
Well, yeah, that's one of several versions that Sammy gave. But it's worth noting that Sammy's story did vary somewhat.
Another initial theory is that she crashed somewhere along the way home. The area is mountainous, and the roads can be difficult to navigate, especially if you're an inexperienced driver who's been drinking and it's the middle of the night. For any of you who may not have ever driven through the mountains, let me just say, some of these mountain roads can be hard to navigate even in broad daylight. Adding drinks into the mix as well as the darkness of night, well, it's a recipe for disaster.
That is, of course, unless you happen to be a super responsible 17-year-old who, according to all her friends and family, wouldn't take the risk of drink driving, and who had considerable experience as a driver long before she got her licence. She lived off-grid. She grew up driving snowmobiles. She had been out riding four-wheel driver bikes in the area of Prosser Reservoir. And let's not also forget that that particular road to get from the area where the party allegedly occurred to the location where her car was eventually found was not a wrong turn road. It was a really long distance from the party to where her car was eventually found, and as opposed to were you to turn right from the party, finding yourself on a nicely paved road that would lead you out of the campground, instead, turning left from the party would put you on this rough road, which, were you somewhat compromised, as in drunk or stoned on drugs, would be extremely hard for you to navigate all the way to its end. You would be more than likely to bottom out your vehicle, run off the road, or flip your vehicle first.
Sammy Smith cooperated with the investigation, as did Kiely's reported ex-boyfriend, Jagger. But media interviews with Sammy and Jagger presented the public with discrepancies. Speculation circulated about the relationship between Kiely, Sammy, and Jagger. Many reported that Sammy and Kiely were not as close as Sammy had led the police to believe. At the time of her disappearance, Kiely and Sammy weren't even friends on social media. But internet sleuths discovered that Sammy and Jagger were. When Sammy and Jagger requested via social media that all in-person leads be directed to them instead of the authorities so that they could, quote, filter information, well, many started to get the feeling that something much more sinister had occurred.
Kudos to him for covering this. This is something that a lot of people have had a lot of discussions about. And, here's the thing. Did we ever clear up what sort of relationship really existed between Sammy and Jagger? We know that Sammy and Kiely weren't connected through social media, but Sammy and Jagger were. Was it something to do with that other boyfriend of Kylie's, the later boyfriend of Kylie's, and somehow there was a connection there. Because we know we saw Sammy at that boy's graduation. We saw her run past Jagger at that boy's graduation. So perhaps she knew Jagger through Kylie's later boyfriend. But that side of things has never been fully cleared up in terms of how did Sammy and Jagger know each other. Now, we know for a fact that Kylie and Sammy weren't friends. We've had that from multiple of Kylie's true friends. So we know that to be the truth. Now, I'm glad that he mentioned about Sammy and Jagger asking for tips to go through them. Because I know that people have had a lot to say about those. We all think it was really odd for Sammy to be asking tips to go through her. And of course, the website, the Find Kylie website, which was run by Sammy, basically had an option for people to download videos and add tips there, meaning that that was bypassing law enforcement, and people had to trust that those tips and videos were going to be passed on to law enforcement. But a theory that I have in terms of Jagger asking for tips to go to him, which I've not voiced before, but I will mention since it got brought up here. And it's my belief that, because I'm still not convinced that Jagger was involved. As far as we know, he was 4 hours away when the party occurred and had nothing to do with Kylie's disappearance. And I've often speculated if perhaps the reason that Jagger was asking people to send tips to him, for him to filter through to the sheriff's office, was that he saw what Sammy was doing. And perhaps he felt that if people were nervous about passing on tips to the sheriff's office, that passing them on to Sammy, those tips might vanish for good. And perhaps he thought that by offering for people to pass tips on to him, that he could prevent tips from vanishing and he could pass them on to the sheriff's office. We know that the sheriff's office made it clear that tips were only to go to them when you had this whole back and forth going on with sending tips to Sammy or Jagger or law enforcement. But just a curious thought. Was Jagger trying to prevent tips from getting to law enforcement? Or was he trying to prevent tips being lost from people who were nervous about giving tips to law enforcement and may have given them to another source that Jagger felt may not pass on the tips? Just consider that.
This, coupled with what many believe to be suspicious behavior, led to the belief that the girl claiming to be friends with Kylie may have had something to do with her disappearance. Following Jagger's public request that he be contacted with the leads, the Placer County Sheriff's Department released a statement via Twitter on August 11th, saying that they never instructed Jagger to collect witness testimony. They emphasized that all information be relayed directly to them. This only increased public suspicion around Jagger and Sammy.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but that particular tweet or post is more direct than the other ones that I've seen from Placer County, where they were less specific about do not direct tips to friends and family of Kiely Rodni, but where they said that all tips should be sent to law enforcement, basically. So the first sentence, I don't recall that being part of that whole, don't send tips to the wrong people. But I may be wrong, because that is very, very specific there. So I think I can forgive this guy for some of the shortcuts that he made earlier, and perhaps some of the times when he may have been a bit slack with his research, because it seems like he is now getting into the nitty-gritty of it.
As photo and video footage from the party started surfacing, it was sent over to be reviewed by the authorities. By August 12, 2022, the search for Kiely intensified. Authorities and volunteers extensively searched her last known location as well as her home, looking for anything that might have led them to finding Kiely.
I think he's making an assumption there, because from my memory, I don't believe that law enforcement did search the lodge when Kiely went missing. They may have done, but if they did, it was very much done without anyone's knowledge, without public knowledge. Although given the media wall that was put around Tony and Lindsay, and the law enforcement wall that was put around Tony and Lindsay, I suspect that if there was a search done of the lodge and around the lodge, that it would have been very much kept under wraps and not mentioned to media in any way. But honestly, I don't believe that Lindsay or Tony were ever under any kind of suspicion with regards to Kiely's disappearance.
In a town hall meeting the week after her disappearance, the Placer County Sheriff's Office outlined their extensive searches. Officials told news outlets that they'd searched as far north as Sierraville and as far east as Verde. To the south, they searched all around Truckee and extended beyond the Jackson Meadows Reservoir to the west, about a 25-mile radius from her last known location. People from the area volunteering in the search explained they didn't believe Kiely or her car was still in the Tahoe National Forest, which stretches over 800,000 miles. This is a vast and scenic area with a diverse landscape ranging from rugged peaks and dense forest to immaculate lakes and rivers. Kiely could have been anywhere, but the search team felt confident that if she was in that forest, they would have found her by now.
So does anyone else think that this guy has found the map of the search area where it had that blue line say stay out of this area, and taken that as his areas to explain where the search occurred? Because we've never had from law enforcement anything about it being a 25-mile radius of the area. We've had them talk about having searched Prosser extensively, and we've had them talking about all the helicopters and planes that went over, but I don't recall them ever mentioning any boundaries in terms of their search. I know there was one point where they spoke about, I think it was their helicopter flying up and down the I-80, but still they didn't give any definition as to, well, we searched within this radius. So I think he's looked at this map and made a few presumptions there based on the map. And as for people saying, well, they don't think that she was in the Prosser, like in the forest area, we've heard Sammy saying stuff like, well, under that tree cover, it could be hard to find people. I think it was Sammy said that. But let's be real, so many people did say that it would be hard to spot a vehicle in some of those areas under the tree cover. The only thing we know for certain was that they thoroughly searched Prosser with divers, boats, helicopters, planes, and that they believed that she was not in the Prosser Reservoir area because they had searched it so thoroughly. I'm going to wrap it up here again. There's still plenty more to discuss. As you can tell, we're still only partway through the description of the search, and I gather he's still covering quite a lot of the case after that. So keep an eye out. There will be more of this series coming out, and you know the routine. Subscribe if you're not already, hit the like button, and leave a comment below. What do you think so far of this documentary video about Kiely Rodni.
I've been